All right, so let's write a code, a program that will generate a random number, and then we'll have our user guess the number. And then we'll add to that as we go along with the next series of videos. So when we are creating a random number, the first thing we have to do is we're going to do what's called import random. And what we're doing here is there's things that come with Python that's kind of standard, like when we do input. Input is something we just have access to. But there's lots of code that has been written for us that we don't have access to immediately, but we would like to utilize. In other words, somebody wrote some code that generates a random number, and if we just simply write the word import, so we're going to tell the compiler or the Python interpreter where to find that that library, it's called, that listing of code, kind of like looking for it in your computer in the directory. Where in my folder, in my documents, can I find a file that tells me how to generate random numbers, or will generate the random numbers for me? So that's kind of what we're doing here with import. We're telling the computer to go look in this file called random. We'll call it file for now, it's a library, but go look in that directory, in that library, for something called random, so you can help me create random numbers and I don't have to do all the hard work because somebody else already did it for me. And so now that I've told Python where to find random, I can use random to generate some random numbers. And let me show you what I mean by that. By the way, you always have to make sure that if you're going to do that, import statements always go at the very beginning. So now that I have access to random, I'm going to create a, let's see, we want to generate a random number, so I'm going to need to create a variable. I'm going to call it random, and it's going to be an integer, so I'm going to declare my integer there. And then we're going to use random, and then equal to, and here's how we write, we access that code. We say, go look in that library that I told you to get up above. So go look in random. And then we use this dot notation, which means inside random, there's this thing called randint. And it's really a method, which we'll learn about as we go along. But we've recognized these parentheses, right? We've done that with input and we've done that with print. So go look in this method, in this folder random, there's some code called randint. And it says that if I send it two numbers, if I put two numbers in the parentheses, that it's going to generate a random number for me, and it's going to give me that random number, and I'm going to put it in my variable. So it's doing all the hard lifting for me, isn't it? I don't have to go write all the code to generate a random number. By borrowing from that library or importing that library, referencing that library name, and then a period, and saying look inside that for a method called randint, and I'm going to send it these two beginning and ending integers. It'll know, oh, I know what to do with that. I'm going to generate a random number between 1 and 10, and I'm going to put that into your variable. Well, how do we know what to put in these parentheses? You'll learn, but for now we're just sort of taking things at face value. So let's print out that random number. Print, there's those parentheses, random number. So what those parentheses mean is that we're calling a method, a bunch of code that somebody else already wrote. We put it together kind of like a variable name. We gave it a name called random, or excuse me, we called it print. And in doing so, we agree that we're going to send it something to print, and it will do it for us. So this is kind of an idea where we're going to be expanding on throughout the semester. So if you don't get the whole concept now, that's okay. Just understand that if I'm using someone else's code, I can get to it with these parentheses, and sometimes I can even send it information to do something with. So let's see if this works. I'm just going to run this code for the moment and see if it works. Generated a 5. That's awesome. So it is doing something. Let's try it again. Oh, generated another 5. Not quite as random as I'd hoped, but that's okay. 9, there we go. Now things are changing a little bit. All right, so you get the concept there. So now we're generating random numbers. So let's throw in a user's guess. Let's get a user to guess our number and see if they can figure out, we'll play guess my number game. Okay, so let's see, we're going to need a variable. We're going to need to put our variables at the top. We're going to do user number, and that's going to be an integer. So then I'm going to ask the user to enter in their guess. User number equals, and then we're going to use input. What is your guess? Hope I spell it right. Your guess. Well, I don't have to, but probably good. And then that comes in as a string, doesn't it? So I need to convert that to an int. This should be sort of a review. Okay, so now I've got user number is, and so I get to guess. What is your guess? I think beforehand I'm going to just print, just so they'll know, because the computer's talking, right? I am thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Okay, great. So what is your guess? And then we let the user put in the guess, and now we have to let them know if they're right or wrong, correct? So obviously I'm not going to end up keeping print num in the real world. Actually, I'm going to put this before. I'll show you why here in a minute. So I'll just leave it there for a moment and see what you think. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and run that to make sure I don't have any syntax errors. And I'm thinking a number between 1 and 10. What is your guess? Well, we print out what the random number is, and that's just so I can test it as I'm running my code to see if I guess correct or if I guess incorrect. But for now, I'm printing it out just for me to test my code, but obviously we're going to want to get rid of that when we actually turn it in or put it out to production. So the user put in a number, and now we have to see if it's correct. So if user number, remember we have to use the double equals because that's a comparison. If user number equals rand number, then they guessed correctly, right? Print, you guessed correctly. Yay! And then otherwise, else, print, nope. Okay, so let's run this and see how we do. So I'm going to test both scenarios. First time I'm going to run it, I know the answer is 9, so I'm going to check 9 just to make sure I guessed correctly. That is what I expected it to do. And now let's guess incorrectly and make sure that it puts out the correct code. I think you must have chosen a 5. Nope. All right, so my code is working correctly so far, and then obviously I would want to delete that or comment that out so that way they wouldn't be guessing all the time. That would be bad. Okay, so this is the beginning of what we're going to be creating, and we have in this one done a review as well as learned how to use the random library and the random method. All right, let's see what we can do next.